Centuries-old wisdom turned Egypt's deadliest resource, sand, into a weapon for survival. Ancient engineers once tamed the Nile's flood with nothing but gravity and shovels. Today, that same principle is quietly fueling one of the boldest agricultural transformations on Earth as simple canals breathe life into barren desert. But with millions futures riding on each drop, who controls the flow and what secrets do the ancient rhythms still hold? Long before concrete dams and satellites, the people of Egypt watched the Nile's rise and fall as closely as the stars. Their entire year revolved around 3 seasons, each written into the rhythm of the river. When Akhet arrived, the world changed. Brown water spilled over the banks, swallowing fields and villages in a slow, predictable flood. For months, nothing grew, just water and silt creeping into every hollow. But this was not disaster. It was the beginning. As the waters pulled back, leaving behind a skin of rich black earth, Perret began. Farmers pressed seeds into mud still wet from the flood, trusting that the Nile's gift would hold until the next rise. Every family, every plot, depended on this timing. The last season, Shemu brought the reward, stalks of grain, bundles of flax, and the quiet hum of harvest. Then the land dried and the waiting returned. The Nile's predictability made this cycle possible, but it also forced a question. What if the flood did not come, or if it came too strong? And ancient engineers answered with grids of earth, basins that trapped the water, holding it just long enough for the soil to drink its fill. These grids were not random. They matched the calendar, letting water linger in some places, move on in others, always guided by the invisible hand of Akhet, Perret, and Shemu. The entire system depended on knowing not just when the water would arrive, but how long it needed to stay. Each sluice, each channel was a line drawn between risk and plenty. This seasonal logic shaped every decision. Planting too soon meant seeds would rot. Planting too late, the earth would crack before roots could take hold. The calendar was not just a record of months. It was a map of survival. In the hands of an engineer, time itself became a tool, no less important than the shovel or the levee. The ancient system's genius lay in its simplicity, and by reading the river's pulse. They turned chaos into order and sand into bread. A simple lever, a bucket, and a counterweight. This is the shaduf, one of Egypt's oldest tools for lifting water. With just a sweep of the arm, a farmer could draw the Nile's gift from a canal to a waiting field, using nothing but muscle and gravity. The shaduf's design is so basic, it seems almost timeless, yet it reveals a deep understanding of balance and effort. Alongside it stood the Nilometer, a stone column marked with bands and numbers set into the riverbank. Each year, when the Nile began to rise, priests and engineers watched the water climb those marks. The Nilometer was more than a ruler, it was a forecast, a warning and a promise. Too little water meant hunger, too much could sweep away the year's hopes. By reading this simple gauge, they could predict the coming harvest and decide how to open or close the network of earthen sluices that shaped the flood. The heart of the system lay in the rule of gravity. Water moved not by force, but by the gentle pull of the earth, slipping from higher canals into lower basins, following lines drawn with a careful eye and a steady hand. Gates and channels cut straight through sand and clay. Let farmers direct the flow with nothing more than a wooden plank or a pile of stones. When water needed to reach fields beyond the river's natural touch, the shaduf took over, lifting, swinging, releasing in a rhythm as old as the Nile itself. This reliance on gravity and simple tools did more than save labor. It made the system reliable, easy to repair, and almost impossible to break. Even today, modern engineers study these ancient designs. The principle is unchanged. Let water run where it wants to go, and guide it gently rather than fighting it with pumps and engines. The canals that now cross Egypt's deserts mimic this logic.
water enters at the highest point, then splits and travels, always seeking the lowest path, always under control. What began with a bucket and a deck became the blueprint for turning sand into soil, a lesson in precision, patience, and the quiet power of simplicity.
Water for Egypt's modern desert fields begins its journey at a place called Damietta, one of the Nile's two great branches as the river splits north of Cairo. Here, engineers drew a line eastward, tracing a path that would bring the river's life far beyond its ancient banks. The plan was bold, to carry Nile water across the delta, then under the Suez Canal itself, a barrier not of sand, but of steel and ships. This crossing demanded more than a simple ditch. In October 1997, after years of preparation, the project reached a milestone. Workers completed a massive culvert, an underground tunnel wide enough to swallow a convoy of trucks that allowed water to flow beneath the Suez, untouched by the traffic above. For the first time, the Nile's current slipped quietly beneath the world's busiest shipping lane, emerging on the other side to greet the barren Sinai. From there, the canal follows a deliberate course. It runs east through the Tina Plain, a stretch of land once known only for its cracked earth and salt marshes. The first 50,000 acres transformed almost overnight as water filled the irrigation grids laid out in anticipation. Satellite images from the late 1990s show a sharp green edge pushing into the beige, the geometry of agriculture carving new patterns into the sand. The route continues, branching and bending to serve each planned block. First Tina, then Quantera, then Rabat, each zone mapped with the precision of a blueprint. The canal's design depends on careful elevation. Gravity does the work, nudging water forward at a measured pace. Sluice gates and regulators, spaced along the route, allow engineers to adjust the flow, making sure each field receives its share. This network is not a river but a system. Every kilometer planned, every culvert and siphon built to keep the journey unbroken. What began at Damietta now stretches deep into Sinai, linking the fate of new Cropland to the old rhythm of the Nile. The route is more than a line on a map. It is the backbone of an audacious gamble that water can turn desert into bread. 50,000 acres of desert, once written off as wasteland, now feed nearly 350,000 people. Each acre is mapped, measured, and made to count, proof that the gamble was more than a dream. Engineers set their sights even higher, 620,000 acres, enough to change the math of hunger for generations. The price tag for this transformation reached 7.5 billion Egyptian pounds, but the logic behind it was clear. Instead of betting on complex machinery or imported technology, the project leaned into simplicity. Water moves by gravity, not by pumps. Sluice gates and earthen banks replace expensive electronics. The result is a network that costs a fraction to run, 10 times less, some say, than the price of pushing seawater through desalination plants. For those who designed the system, the risk was personal. One engineer remembers standing at the edge of the Tina Plain, blueprint in hand, staring at a horizon that offered nothing but sun and silence. The calculations were unforgiving. Get the slope wrong and water would pool or vanish before reaching its mark. Build too high and the canals would dry before the fields ever turned green. But the reward was just as real. The first crops, wheat, barley, even flax, rose out of the sand, row by row. Each harvest was a signal that the old logic still worked. Simple tools, careful planning, and trust in the land's ability to change. The numbers tell a story of scale, but they also hint at something deeper. Every acre reclaimed is a promise kept, not just to the planners in Cairo, but to thousands of families betting their futures on new soil. The efficiency of the canals does more than save money. It creates a margin for hope. In a region where every drop of water is counted, simplicity is not just a design choice, it is the edge that keeps the gamble alive. A city apartment emptied in a single afternoon, boxes stacked in the hallway, a battered suitcase wedged shut with rope. For one family, the decision to leave behind the known, including friends, schools, and the steady pulse of city life, came with no guarantee of return. The promise was simple: land in the desert, enough to farm, enough to build something lasting. But the reality was harder to picture. The train east rattled past fields that grew thinner, then vanished. Sand pressed against the window, stretching into a horizon that seemed endless. For the parents, every mile brought a new calculation. They had sold what they could,
borrowed what they couldn't, and accepted a plot marked only by stakes in the dust. The government offered a map, a deed, and the hope that water would arrive on schedule. There were rumors. Some said the canals would never reach this far. Others spoke of first harvests already pulled from the sand. The risk was real. Savings dwindled as they waited for the first delivery of water. The children asked about school, about friends left behind, about what would grow in a place where nothing had ever grown before. Each night the couple sat on the roof of their half-built home, watching the wind sweep lines across the empty plain. They talked about the future in careful terms, measuring hope against uncertainty. Neighbors arrived in trucks and buses, each family carrying its own version of the same wager. In the mornings, everyone gathered at the edge of the new canal, scanning the channel for a shimmer, a sign that the gamble might pay off. The waiting became its own kind of work, a test of patience, faith, and the stubborn belief that green would one day replace the brown.
The first harvest arrived quietly, almost as if the land itself was surprised. Rows of wheat stood golden against the sky, their roots anchored in what had once been lifeless sand. For families who had waded through months of dust and uncertainty, the sight was more than proof. It was relief. Children ran between the stalks, their hands brushing against grain heads, laughter chasing away the memory of empty fields. The air, once sharp with the smell of sun-baked earth, now carried the scent of fresh-cut straw. With the harvest came work. Packing sheds rose where only tents had stood, and trucks lined up to carry the season's yield to distant markets. Jobs multiplied in places that had never known steady employment. Young men who once left for Cairo or Alexandria found reasons to stay. Women found work sorting and bundling, their wages spent in new shops and schools built for the growing community. Even the smallest children joined the rhythm, carrying water, gathering stray stalks, and learning from their parents what it meant to coax life from the desert. The change was visible from above, patches of green and gold spreading outward, each one a signal that the gamble had paid off. But the ripple ran deeper. In the evenings, families gathered to count the sacks and share stories of the first yield. Hope, once rationed, began to feel ordinary. The harvest did more than fill granaries. It filled the space between risk and reward, turning a national experiment into daily bread. Egypt's ambitions rest on numbers as much as on hope. The country's share of the Nile, fixed at 55.5 billion cubic meters each year, defines the upper limit of what can be grown, built, or dreamed. From this total, a slice of 5.5 billion cubic meters is carved out for the Toshka project alone, a tenth of the nation's annual water budget redirected into the desert. Every drop is measured, tracked, and fiercely protected. Moving water on this scale requires force. At Toshka, a pumping station rated at 250 megawatts stands at the edge of Lake Nasser. Its turbines drive water up and out, feeding a canal system that snakes across hundreds of kilometers of sand. When the first water flowed into the Sheikh Zayed Canal in 2003, it marked the start of a new phase, one where engineering muscle replaced the ancient patience of gravity alone. The Al Salam Canal, by contrast, leans on the logic of gravity, channeling Nile water eastward from the Damietta branch, under the Suez Canal, and into the waiting grids of Sinai. Together, these networks aim to reclaim over 1 million acres of desert, with 620,000 acres targeted by the Al Salam system and more than 400,000 by Toshka. The cost is staggering, over 7.5 billion Egyptian pounds for Al Salam alone, with further billions poured into Toshka's pumps, pipes, and fields. Yet the real cost is counted in water. Each cubic meter diverted is a promise to feed families, to settle new towns, to secure Egypt's place in a region where water is power. The scale of these projects is not just a feat of engineering, but a statement of intent. In a world of shrinking resources, the numbers behind Egypt's canals are both a lifeline and a line in the sand. International headlines rarely mentioned what was happening in Egypt's deserts. Over the course of 5 years, only 3 major articles appeared in foreign newspapers about the new croplands pushing into Sinai and the western desert. Requests from foreign journalists for site visits often stalled in paperwork, with visa approvals quietly delayed or denied. The result was a silence that seemed almost intentional,
An agricultural transformation on a continental scale unfolded with little outside attention. Regional analysts noticed the quiet. In trade ministries across the Middle East and North Africa, import forecasts began to shift. Egypt's grain output, once a fixed number in annual reports, started to climb. By the time the first 350,000 people were eating bread grown on land, once written off as useless, neighboring countries revised their own calculations. Wheat imports from Europe and Russia, once a staple for Egypt, no longer rose at the pace expected. In some capitals, food security reports flagged Egypt's new capacity as a variable in regional supply chains. The muted press coverage did not go unnoticed by those watching the Nile. One analyst described it as a strategic blackout, not a formal policy, but a pattern that suited all parties. Egypt avoided the scrutiny that comes with global attention, sidestepping questions about water rights and resource allocation. Neighbors, meanwhile, recalibrated quietly, wary of the ripple effects on their own food supplies and political stability. The absence of noise became its own kind of statement. In a region where water is power and bread is politics, the transformation of Egypt's deserts was both a technical feat and a geopolitical maneuver, one that unfolded for the most part in the shadows. Egypt now ranks among the world's top importers of wheat, yet every acre coaxed from the desert with canal water is a shield against food insecurity and regional instability. As climate change accelerates and the Nile's flows grow unpredictable, these reclaimed fields become battlegrounds for sovereignty and survival. The next harvest isn't just about crops, it's about who controls tomorrow. What would you risk to secure your future? Share your thoughts below.